All right, let's talk about plotting cabinets. Plotting cabinets is pretty easy. There's a method to it, so we're going to get into it here. Let's open up our CAD file. And also, what I'm going to do as well is we did reference um, a document earlier when we were talking about cabinet construction. That document also has guidelines as to what is expected for dimensioning and tagging your cabinet. So fortunately for you, it makes things really easy to understand, even if things are complicated. I know that like kind of getting into learning how to do the drawing standards and all of that is kind of a chore on its own. But looking at, let me find it real quick. Looking at the expectations of what it is or what it takes to draw and dimension and plot something. Here, we'll take a look at this real quick. This is the cabinet construction document that we had referred to the other day when we were talking about cabinet construction. One of the several pages that we have. They're actually located in this folder here. If you need them for any reason, if you just want to use them as a reference, you can. They're in the engineering in-house folder. They're going to be under quality. And then you can find these in standard operating procedures and supplemental documents. That's a mouthful. And then under 5.0 listing, I also have these linked as well. If you are looking at the folder that I have all these videos saved to, they are actually also linked here as well. So I have these drafting standard documents, drawing standard documents, sorry, here. They're hyperlinked right to that folder. So if you need to see any of those, they are there. Let's look at the document for base cabinets here. So expectations from what we would expect to see on a print for cabinets. Starting with the plan view, you are always going to have the countertop width, the countertop depth. Those two dimensions are extremely critical. If you have upper cabinets, it's also important to label the upper cabinet depth here as well. It's not on this print, but we will talk about that because we do have upper cabinets in our example drawing that we're working on. You also have, these are locating tags. This is an elevation call. Elevation calls are what will refer you to the elevation view on the drawing. So just like when you're going through a set of architecturals, for example, the one we're working on, in this room, they have an elevation call here, which will tell you if you go to view 1 on this page, it takes you to the front view of these cabinets, or the elevation view. Well, we also need to provide one on our drawings too, so we're going to have one pointing towards the front of our counter, and that is called the elevation call. The first number at the top is the view number. The number at the bottom is the page number that view can be found on. All right. So then other things that you may need to include as part of your plan view is if you have to put any field joints in your countertop. Field joints are going to be, like it says here, determined by material availability. Also can also be determined by the ability to get that material within the building. So two stipulations you have to watch out for. One, you never want to draw a counter larger than what you can buy the countertop material in. So let's say this solid surface 1 in this example comes in a size of 96 inches or 8 feet. You would want to have a field joint in here because you can't have the countertop be 114 inches when the manufacturer only sells it in 96-inch wide slabs. So one example of why you need a field joint. The other example is looking at a floor plan. Typically in a building, and this might be this might not be the greatest example, being this is on either a ground floor or a basement level, which probably has a walk-in door from the outside of the building. But most of the jobs that we have are on several different floors. They could be up on the 9th floor, up on the 3rd floor, whatever. So one of the things that we have to watch out for is if we're able to get material and furniture pieces in the building through the corridors and through the service elevator. So at the beginning of every job, we try to request the information for how large the service elevator is, which helps us understand if we're able to get the product through the building, through the service elevator. Specifically relates to furniture mostly, but it can apply to cabinets and counters too. So it's important to note that like if your service elevator is relatively small on a job, there's going to be some limitations as to what we're going to be able to get in the building. Now, there are some times where there's jobs where they actually will remove windows on the side of a building and use a crane outside the building to lift pallets of furniture and things in the building. That is extremely rare, but it does happen from time to time. And that's really in cases where the service elevator in a building is too small for whatever it is that we're providing. It is a very, very rare occurrence, but it does happen. So I can't discount it. But most times than not, we want to make sure that that material is going to be able to get through the building, whether it's through doors, corridors, or the service elevator. And we also want to make sure that we can buy that material in the size that we are drawing it at. So that is field joints and why they are important when it comes to things like countertops here, for example. We'll talk about that with panels as well later on, but just here, countertops are going to be the main guy that you're going to have to deal with that for cabinets. So anyway, back to what we're talking about. So on your cabinet plotting standards, you have your countertop depth, countertop width, you have your field joints located, you have your elevation calls that you need to point to, anything that we are drawing an elevation view of. That will help the person looking at the print navigate to what they need to be looking at. Imagine you being the first person to look at this print for the first time, or being a person to look at this print for the first time. You want to make sure that it is extremely clear as to what we're looking at and how we're getting to that. So we're starting at the plan view and we're working our way around by providing these little indicators like the elevation call. And later we'll talk about section calls, which will tell you where to go to find the view that we're pointing out. All right, right below that you have what is called the view title. The view title is really important as well. It is going to tell the person looking at the print what type of drawing they're looking at. So I guess what direction they're looking at the product at. In this case, it says plan view, which is also in the mechanical drafting industry, that's called the top-down view. But in the architectural industry, we call that the plan view. So we're looking at the plan view right now, the top of our countertop and the top of our cabinets. To the right of that, this is a line that is automatically populated by the description in your title block. However, if you are working on a detail or a section and you want to go the extra mile to label that as something more specific, we are all for that. So like example, if you have a detail pointing to like a cabinet pole, you can say instead of plan at casework, maybe you'll put detail at cabinet pole or hardware 53. Below the label at the top, you see there is scale. We've been using that on the architectural drawings, but that is also really important here. Fortunately for you today, this is a formula as well. So as long as you copy your viewport, which we'll talk about in a moment, and your view title at the same time, the scale will automatically link to that viewport. And if you ever change the scale in the viewport, this will automatically update for you as well. To the right of that, you have your ARC reference. Architectural reference, meaning that is just whatever view the architect has provided that matches this view. So in the case of what we're dealing with, we'll talk about this more in just a moment, but in our plan view, our ARC reference or our architectural reference is going to be this here. It's A1, which is the view, slash, and then we're going to put A02-34, meaning that's the page and that's the view that we're referring to get to this view here. All right. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else plan view wise that you are going to need as far as labeling goes. We might be okay with what we just talked about there. We'll move on to the elevation view next. So very similar notes here for the most part. Dimensionally, the things that we're looking for, anytime there's an overhang at a finished end, we want to make sure that we label what that overhang is. In this case, this is a 1/4 inch overhang, which is our standard anyway. If you have a finished end, please be sure to make sure that you say finished end or FE next to that finished end, so that way the shop knows that they have to apply that laminate, the finished laminate, to the side of that cabinet before it goes out the door. Things like this, laminate calls or finish calls. If your laminate or your finish has a grain direction to it, meaning that it is either wood grained or it has a pattern to it that has a specific direction to it, you want to make sure that you put one of these on here. This is a grain direction symbol, also found in your on-site annotative tool palette. When you are labeling your cabinets, it is a requirement that you call out the finish of the cabinet doors. However, you only have to apply one typical finish to those cabinets. So in this case here, we're putting one PL1 here, meaning that every single cabinet is all PL1. So we don't have to put a PL1 on every door. We just need it on one door, as long as that's the typical finish for all of these cabinets. So that's kind of a tricky thing too. When I first started here, I had the tendency to want to label every cabinet, but you really don't have to do that. In fact, it's suggested you don't, because it will clutter up your drawing and make it harder to read. So in order for us to make things a little bit more legible, what we'll do is we'll label one cabinet door, and that'll be your typical finish for all those cabinets. For the other dimensions that you're seeing here, requirements for cabinet elevations, you are going to need to provide whatever the floor height is to the top of the counter. And that is the only height dimension that we are going to require you to put on a drawing for elevation of cabinets. However, if you have upper cabinets too, you're going to want to also put a dimension from the countertop to the bottom of that upper cabinet, and from the bottom of the upper cabinet to the ceiling or the top of that cabinet. So we're going to talk about that more, because this document doesn't provide that here, but our drawing will have to have that. So we're going to talk about that when we actually go to Dimension RPrint. At the bottom, these are your horizontal dimensions. So most cabinet drawings, what you're going to have here is you're going to have to label your fillers. So we're going to label that with whatever the dimension of the filler is. 3/4 is our standard for fillers, but sometimes they can vary. And then you'll want to put filler at the end of that, so 3/4 inch filler, so people understand what this is. Then you have your cabinets. We dimension each cabinet carcass, not cabinet door. So we're dimensioning from far left to far right of each cabinet. And we're going to daisy chain that all the way through. And then when you get to the end, this one here says hold on it. Okay, so a hold dimension is going to usually be used whenever there's equipment or anything like that in a cabinet. We also will put something on the dimension itself that is called VWE, or verify with equipment. And we'll usually put that at the front of the dimension, just like this. Now, something else worth noting that we haven't talked about too, and we'll come right back to this, I don't want to jump around too much, but if you have anything that is between two walls or two other people's scope, for example, this here, this countertop here is sandwiched between two drywall walls. And because of that, we have to put what's called a VIF on the dimension. That also stands for verify in field. That means that the project manager and the job site superintendent have to work together to pull field dimensions off of the drywall once the drywall is installed, to make sure that our cabinets are actually going to fit between this opening here. Drywall has a tendency to be a little lackadaisical when it comes to their dimensions, so they'll be pretty close, but they usually will be off, unfortunately. So we have to make sure that all of these things here have to be verified whenever they're dealing with things between walls like this. If you ever have questions about if you need to provide a VIF on a dimension, please let me know. I'll try to explain that a little more if there are any areas that need that. All right, so going back to your elevation view here, you also see something new. This is a section call. Very similar to an elevation call, this is going to be added to any area that we are making a section through. So we kind of did a little bit of this in the last video when we drew those red lines in, cutting through our cabinets where we're going to throw in those section views. So we're going to replace those essentially with these. Now these also work the same way as an elevation view. The top number is your view number. The bottom number is your page number. So we also need to include that. Geez Louise, my email is blowing up. You need to include that here to let the user or the person reading this print know where to go to find the section that you're looking for. At the very bottom, you still have your view title, which is exactly the same as what we've done before. Only difference is as you're going through the drawing, you'll notice that the first one here is labeled 1, meaning that is the first view on this page. The second view is always going to say 2. And one thing to keep note of as well is that our views actually do go in a specific order. So when we go to plot the drawing, we'll talk a little bit more about that too. But we're always going to start with the plan view first, followed by a reflected ceiling plan if you have to provide one. Reflected ceiling plans are only utilized whenever there is something on the ceiling that you're trying to show within a drawing. So sometimes you won't always need that, but I wanted to include it here. So you're starting with your plan view. Second view would always be your reflected ceiling plan if applicable. Then you're going to go on to your elevation views next. So then elevation views are all going to be labeled whatever the next number is after the plan and the reflected ceiling plan. And then after your elevation views is where your section views come in. So your section views will follow the elevation view in the sequence of the drawing. And then the detail views, which we'll talk about that a little more too. You probably won't have so many detail views to add for cabinets, but detail views are used whenever there is a very small part of the drawing that needs to be very well documented and detailed out. So see if there is one on here. No, there's not. But most cabinets don't have those anyway. But a detail view can be placed anywhere on the drawing. There is no limit to where they go. They don't have to be in any specific order. Preferably, a detail view should go on the page that it's being pulled from. So if you were making a detail here of your cabinet pulls, I would prefer to see that on the same page as the elevation view where you're pulling that detail from. So that is just preferred. It's not 100% required, but it makes a world of difference when you're looking at a drawing for the first time and you're able to see exactly the detail and where it's coming from on the same page. Details also don't have a number for their view title number. They actually have a letter. So every page you start with is going to have, if you have a detail on that page, it will start with detail A on that page number. We're going to get more into that too, but they use letters versus numbers, which makes it so you can place them anywhere on the drawing and it won't interfere with the sequence of the rest of the views. All right, enough about detail views. So going on to section views next. These standards are slightly different than when this document was released. Not by a lot, but I'll explain that here real quick. So dimensionally from your section view, what we're going to require you to have on here is we would like to show the dimensions that are on there currently. Plus, we also want to include the bottom of the cabinet to the front of the toe kick. And we would also like to require this dimension here. Now this is going to be the dimension for the floor to the very top of that cabinet carcass. So being really careful, we're not going to the top of the counter here, we're going to the top of the cabinet carcass. That is a dimension that is going to be required, just so you get the backstory here. The dimension there is required for the outsourced manufacturer. So if we are not building this cabinet in the Loves Park on-site shop, it will go to an outsourced manufacturer, so another company that builds cabinets. We will sell them work occasionally if we are really busy in the shop and we don't have the capacity to pick up new work. And so one of the things that they actually require is they actually want to see the cabinet height from floor, and they also want to see the cabinet depth too. So we include these two dimensions on top of the other ones in black here that are on this document. So the other dimensions that are in black, these are your toe kick depth, your toe kick height, your door height or drawer heights if you have drawers, and then your door gap, so or drawer gaps too if you have those as well. And remember too, that's a 1/4 inch there, and any door or drawer, well, any drawer below this is going to have an 1/8 inch gap instead of a 1/4, but the first one always starts with a 1/4 inch gap. And then you want to make sure you dimension the apron of your countertop here too. Most times it will be 1.5 inches, but there will be some variations occasionally that you'll see on the drawings. So keep an open mind and try to watch out for that too. So these are the dimensions that are required for section views. If you notice that there are not so many hardware and finish calls on this view, and that's because we use the page notes that we kind of referenced at the beginning of the drawing process to fill out a lot of that information ahead of time. So hinges do not need to be labeled anymore, so you don't have to put a hardware call on your hinge. That's going to be communicated by the general notes on the side of your drawing. Shelf pins are the same way. We don't need to include the hardware for the shelf pin. It will be in the general notes page or side page of your drawing. We no longer actually require to add the dimension of the adjustable shelf, so you don't have to worry about that either. And let's see. Oh yes, this is also very important too. So if your section view is not on the same page as your plan view, now this one is, but if your plan view and your section view are on the same page, you don't have to put a dimension here from front to back of counter. However, if your cabinet section is on the second page and your plan view is on the first page, it will be required that you do provide this dimension here. This is the countertop depth. And the reason why that matters is because if you have these paper drawings out in the field, it is very difficult and time consuming to flip back and forth between the first page and the third or the fourth page to get to that dimension there for the countertop depth. So as long as your plan view and your section view are on the same page, you do not need to worry about this. If your section view is on a separate page, that is where it is important that we include that dimension there. So again, dimensionally, this is what is a requirement for countertops and cabinets. We always want to provide the depth, the width on the plan view. We want to provide each cabinet width on the elevation view alongside with any fillers and overhangs. And we also want to provide the height from floor to top of counter, again, just on elevation views. You don't have to go and dimension the toe kick and the gap and all that here. That is all handled by that section view, so that's all going to be taken care of later. And then again, section views, dimensionally, what you need is you need to go from floor to top of cabinet carcass and from front to back of the sub base below the cabinet, and then from front of toe kick to front of door, and then from floor to bottom of door, which will be the height of your toe kick, and then from bottom of door to top of door, and then gaps, and the apron of the countertop. That is the requirements for cabinet dimensioning. So if you ever want to refer to this, this is a very good document to circle back to. If you have questions or you kind of need some help or some guidance on how to dimension something, definitely explore that folder. There's a lot there that is going to be helpful in terms of how do you actually draw something and what is required of you when you go to draw it. So let's go back to our drawing here. And one thing that I can't stress enough is when you get into plotting a drawing, it's great to have all of your line work done here ahead of time. That's what I would usually do, is make sure your elevation views, section views, and plan view are all drawn in 2D here first. Then what you're going to do is you're going to go over to your paper space. So we need to go to L1. And in here is a little hard to see, but there is a rectangle that's right here. You can tell where it stops because that radius corner is the border of your drawing, but this little rectangle with the sharp corner is actually what is called a viewport. Okay, so a viewport is a window that looks into the model space of your drawing, if you want to think about it that way. So as I'm looking at this, if I double click on that viewport, it lets me go into that window and it lets me navigate just like I would be able to through the model space. What I'm going to be doing here is each view of our drawing needs to have its own separate viewport. So every time you start a drawing, you are given one viewport and one view title to start with, which will get you started enough to be able to take it from there. But what you want to do is in your viewport, you're going to have to activate a drawing scale or assign a drawing scale to your viewport. Something that is really important, and it's on that supplemental document that I had handed you. It's also in the video folder there too. When you're dealing with views on your paper space, there's actually very strict guidelines as far as what minimum scales you actually can use within the AWI standards. So plan views, it says this here, this does not print either, but it's there for your reference, but it gives you the AWI reference number to look it up in the book. It also tells you that plan views shall be drawn in minimum of 3/8 inch equals a foot scale. So what that means is if I'm looking at my viewport here, in the bottom right hand corner, if I click on this little drop down right here, these are all the different scales that are in AutoCAD that you have available to you to set to your view title or your viewport. So the AWI standard says 3/8 equals a foot scale is the minimum. So what that means is if I go here and I tell it this view is 3/8 equals a foot, that is the bare minimum that you can get by with according to the American Woodwork Institute. So that is actually very small though, honestly. Like that is a little too small to really be able to really do much with anyway. A lot of times with cabinets, your plan view is usually going to be somewhere between 3/4 of an inch equals a foot to 1 inch equals a foot scale. That is pretty standard. So what I would like to do is start with that 1 inch equals a foot scale. So again, that's your minimum. So anything higher than that is going to be out of our limitation. Like we're not able to really use those for plan views, but anything below here is something you can use according to American Woodwork Institute's guidelines. So let's start with 1 inch equals a foot scale and just see how that would fit on the paper. So I know this is kind of outside the viewport. Viewports are adjustable. You can move them around and adjust the size of them. So just looking at this, this should be able to fit on the paper, no issue at all. But one thing I want to do before we even call that viewport done is you want to do your best effort to align it to the grid and to your view titles. So what we're going to do here is we're going to be using, make sure that you're outside of that viewport. So if you're inside of that viewport, that's if you double click on it, you can see the border turns dark. And if you zoom with your scroll wheel, you'll end up changing the scale by accident. So as I did that, you could see like now my scale is like some random number. You want to make sure you don't do that by mistake. So once you've set that scale, go ahead and hit this padlock icon. This padlock icon will prevent you from accidentally zooming in and out or changing the scale in your viewport. So we'll padlock that once we have our scale set that we want. Then we'll double click outside of that viewport, or if you can't double click outside that viewport, let's say maybe you're zoomed in a little too far like this, and you're stuck in that viewport and you can't zoom out, that's, I guess if the padlock was undone. You can also type in PS or Paperspace, and it will take you back to Paperspace. So it'll kick you out of that viewport then. Anyways, where I'm going with this though is we're going to use the move command here now that we're outside of that viewport and the viewport scale is locked. And we're going to use the move command, highlight that viewport. We are going to then take an endpoint, preferably the bottom left corner of that viewport or view that we're working on. We're going to take that and use that as a way to move the view. So I'm moving the entire viewport based on this point here. So what I'm going to do with that first is I'm going to snap that point to the top corner of my view title here. So just that point right there where my cursor is. And then you will want to use the move command one more time. And we're going to move this up, but be sure to make sure you have your F8 key or your ortho snap turned on. And we're going to move this up 1.5 inches higher than the view title. Now, that is not a set standard. I typically will use 1.5 inches to move it up off of there because it gives me enough margin space. If I have to put a dimension or a material call or anything in here, I have space to do it. You don't want to have this right on top of that view title, and you also don't want to have it touching it either. So I usually stack it right at the corner. So take the corner of my view, move it to line up right with the corner of the view title, and then I'll move it 1.5 inches upward above that. So that way everything is nice and tidy, everything's in line with the view title, but also it gives you a little bit of space to work with down here in case you need it. Then what you're going to want to do is highlight that viewport one more time, and you're going to take the grip points of that viewport and resize them. And you can play around with this a little bit. I usually like to snap to that grid that's there in green and try to get something that looks nice. So something like that. The edges of the viewport here, once you select it here, they're in blue right here. They don't print either, but it is really nice to be able to make sure that everything is snapped to that grid. So I highly, highly, highly recommend that you go through and make sure that everything is snapped to that grid accordingly. All right, so before we move on, let's go ahead and, well, I guess we're good with this one. Let's make a copy of this viewport and this view title. To do that, you may have a tendency to want to use the Control-C and Control-V method to copy this. I'm going to show you something real quick. There's a problem with that in AutoCAD. If you use Control-C and Control-V, any formula-based references will actually break in the process of copying that, and in turn will turn into a bunch of hashtags like this. The reason why that happens is when you use Control-C and Control-V, what you're doing is you're actually copying that viewport and the view title to your computer's clipboard in Microsoft Windows, and then pasting it back into AutoCAD. So you're taking that out of the program, putting it on your clipboard, and then you're putting it back into the program, which actually breaks down the formula and makes it so it doesn't actually work. So how to get around that is you are going to, instead of using Control-C and Control-V to make a new viewport, you're going to use the COPY copy command in AutoCAD. which does not remove the view title and the viewport from AutoCAD. It keeps it in the program the entire time, and it won't break the formulas because of that reason. So now what I'm going to do is I highlighted my viewport, highlighted my view title. I'm going to hit the enter button, and then I'm going to take the endpoint of this and slide it on down so it's lined up with the edge of my viewport for my first view. So now I have two plan views in here, but this is going to end up being the elevation view next. As you're laying out your views, also keep in mind that we do want to make sure that we are going in order. So again, like we talked about before, plan views are always going to be the first view on the drawing, followed by any reflected ceiling plans, then elevation views, then section views, and then details. And the order matters because you want to also make sure that you're putting these views on the paper as you're reading a book. So you're kind of thinking about it like I am reading this drawing from left to right and top to bottom, just like I would read a book. So as I move from the left side of my screen to the right side of my screen, these view numbers should go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and so on. So that's really, really important when plotting a drawing. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the elevation view. So because we already have the secondary viewport in here, what we got to do is double click in there. We're going to unlock it, clicking that padlock icon at the bottom. And then we're going to go find our elevation view. So you can zoom out now if you'd like to, if you need to. See you, man. Have a good weekend. All right. Okay. Sounds good. Have a good weekend. All right. Anyways, elevation views. So with this here, what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in on that elevation view that we have here. And then you're going to want to set that scale. So I'm going to keep this at 1 inch equals a foot as well, just to match. It's nicer if everything does have the same scale. That way, as you're looking from one view to the other, your cabinets don't look like they grew or shrank. Everything's going to be the same. So I'm using 1 inch equals a foot for this view as well, just like our plan view. And I'm doing the same exact thing that I did before. I'm using the move command, taking the bottom left corner of my view, placing it right on top of that corner of my view title. And then I'm going to use the move command one more time, highlight that viewport again, and then I'm going to move that up with my ortho snap turned on 1.5 inches. So I do that on purpose because, again, it leaves you with enough gap to put dimensions and tags down below, but it also will keep everything in line from left to right. So when you go to plot this drawing, let me go to my print preview, for example, here, so I could show you what that would look like. So on my drawing, when I go to print this, you're going to notice that this is perfectly lined up with this, all the way from left to right. Like this line is in the same exact line as this. It just makes things a lot more cleaner looking and a lot easier to read as you're going through your drawing after it's been plotted. So it's really important that we do that, and just making sure that everything is lined up. That's why this grid is in here too, to help you with that too. Anyways, before we move on, we also want to start working on updating our view titles. So this view title here, the first one is all right. Like the only thing that we have to fill out on it is this arc reference. So we can do that right now. You just double click on arc reference and this little dialog box will pop up. And this is where you're going to type in the page that you have to go to get to the architect's version of the same plan view. So let's look at the architect's drawing one more time. And we are going to label it with this view number and this page number. Sometimes they aren't as nice and they might only put the view number here. And if that's the case, the page number is always going to be located on the far right-hand side or bottom right-hand side of each drawing. So anyways, because they were really nice about it and they put it here, we're going to use that to label our drawing. So it's A1 is the view number. We're going to put A1/A A02-34. So let's go back. So A1/A02-34. Let me just make sure that was correct. Yep, okay, cool. So that's all good to go. That means whoever is looking at this drawing, if they need to see the architect's drawing, they can go right to this. It'll take them right there. All right, next view title. This is going to need to say elevation view and not plan view. To change that, all you're going to do is highlight the view title, and you're going to switch it over to say elevation view using that toggle at the bottom. If you notice too, sometimes the text does overhang that extra border piece that's down here. So there is a stretch grip attached to that too. You can adjust it. It's preferred that it actually lines up with the end of the text if you can get it that close. As long as it's close, that's what really matters the most. So you want to get it as close as you can to the back edge of that text, just like that. But you don't want it to be something like this where the text is kind of free floating past it like that, because that just kind of looks bad when you go to plot it. So again, if I go to print preview here to show you what that looks like, you know, this does look much nicer over here compared to this, where this kind of looks like it's kind of half thrown together like that. So we don't want to see that. We want to make sure that this line of this outline underneath of the view title matches up with the length of the text. So like that. All right, so because this is the second drawing on this page, we want to make sure this actually says view number 2 instead of view number 1. And also something else to take note of too, as you update the type of view, you're going to notice that this here, this AWI minimum scale is going to change too. So let me show you real quick. If I go to section view, it does update to the minimum AWI scale being 1.5 equals a foot for section views. So just something to take note of. That's there for your reference and benefit, so that way you don't have to remember those minimum scales. They're also on that supplemental document that I have over to you in Teams too. So if you ever have a question or need to look that up, it's there too. But it's also in AutoCAD to help you with that. Let's pull in our arc reference for our elevation view. Elevation view is going to be, sorry, I gotta find my Bluebeam again. All right, so elevation view, that was this view here, which if you want to know how to get to that again, if you're looking at the floor plan of the building, you can see that called out here as well. But this is view number 1 on page I08-01. So view 1 on I08-01. Let's go back to AutoCAD here. Okay, and we're going to label that view 1 on I08-01, just like that. And then always double check to make sure that you have it correct too, because it's very easy to mess those up. There's a lot of letters and numbers mixed in. So, all right, that should do it for that. So our first page is done. There's nothing more to add to it, but if you notice, there is a little bit of a lack of space over here, which right now it doesn't look like it, but by the time we throw all the dimensions and everything on there, we may actually want a little bit more space on this side of this countertop. And we have a lot of space over here. So what I would like to do is kind of move all of my viewports and view titles over maybe a grid space, just like this. And then I'm going to open this up a little bit more. I'm going to line this up with the edge of my paper like that, just using that grip point. That'll give me a little bit more room to work in over here to make sure that I have enough room for all my dimensions and all my material information. I could also move this over too to help balance things out. It may not be such a bad idea to do that. In that case, maybe you could move this over too. The viewport, again, does not print. Like these lines that are in blue here that I'm adjusting, those don't print on the paper, but they're there because that's what you're using to kind of use as a window to look at your model space. So let's just make sure that I have this locked. It's a good thing to double check all of your viewports and make sure that this icon of the blue or the lock is blue, meaning that it is locked. And once you're done there, that is pretty much it for the first page of our drawing set. So we're going to go and make a second page. The second page will be for our section views. So we're going to go right click on this tab where it says L1 currently. We're going to right click on that and we're going to go to move or copy. Once you open that up, this dialog box will pop up. And in order to make a new tab or a new page, what you have to do is hit this checkbox here that says create a copy. I usually will click move to end, meaning that the new page will show up at the end of the drawing set. And then you can just hit OK. So again, when you do that, you right click on your tab, go to move or copy. Then you're going to go over here, select create a copy, move to end, and then you're going to hit OK. Now that we have that, you can see there's a new tab down here. AutoCAD will automatically label it with a number at the end, which we're going to change. So all of our drawings will always start with L, well, not all of our drawings, but your drawings will always end with the first page being a 0 at the end of it. Second page will always say 1 at the end of it, and third page will always say 2, and so on. So the second tab here, we're going to right click on this. We are going to rename that tab to read L1.1 because it's page number 2. So we have that 0.1 there to represent that. And we also have an exact replica of the first page, which we're going to end up changing anyway. So what we want to do is actually go ahead and just delete that second viewport, and we're going to go back down to having one viewport for the drawing here. So just like we did before on the previous page, we're going to go in here and we're going to unlock that viewport. We're going to zoom out and we're going to locate those section views, and we're going to have to put all of these on the paper. So section views, according to the AWI rules, they have to be at minimum at 1.5 inch equals a foot scale. So as you put these on your drawing, make sure that you are at least using 1.5 inch equals a foot scale. So when you double click in that viewport, come on down to here, your little drop down at the bottom, right hand side, we're going to click on 1.5 inch equals a foot. That, even though it looks a little small, is actually pretty standard for section views. You could make them even larger. You could go up to 3 inch equals a foot scale if you'd like to, but I would highly recommend starting with 1.5 inch because we have to put a lot of section views on this page, and if we make this any bigger, it's going to eat up a lot of our real estate on the page, and we really don't want to waste any of that in case we need it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use that move command. I'm actually going to move the entire viewport and the view title this time, because in the last drawing what we did was we actually moved all of that over one grid space to the right. I'm going to go ahead and move this one grid space back that way towards the left. And what I'm going to do now is, much like what we did before, we're going to use the move command. We're going to then take the bottom left corner of that view and we're going to line it up with the left-hand side of our view title like this. So again, same process as what we had on the previous page, but we're going to use the move command now, and we're going to move this up 1.5 inches. And then from there, all we want you to do is take that viewport and kind of readjust it just to fit a little better on the page. Definitely take advantage of those grids because those grids are going to help you with making sure you can kind of evenly space everything out on your paper. Once you're really good with what you got, you really like where your view is, you can go ahead and double click in that viewport and hit that padlock icon. That way it will prevent you from accidentally scrolling and changing that view scale again. And then down here, just like before, we're going to change our view title to read section view because that's what we're looking at now. We will have to update the arc reference, and we will also want to take note that we want to make sure that we are paying close attention to these minimum scales, making sure that we are staying within those scales. Now, right now this says 1 inch equals a foot. A lot of times AutoCAD has a little bit of a delay to it, so I might have to type regen here, which is AutoCAD's version of refresh. So if I hit regen, it's going to update that automatically to what is currently on the drawing, or for the viewport. Now, another thing that you might have a question about here is that I'm on page 2, so something to take note of is that my view numbers are also going to restart at 1. So every time you start a new page, your view numbers restart too. Some people might look at this and think, oh, this is my third view, so I'm going to label this as view number 3. But in reality, you want to start back at 1. So I'm on the second page. This is going to be view 1 on this page. So something to look out for anyway. I might just resize that a little bit. Maybe I'll take that back. We'll leave it there. All right. So let's fill out that arc reference here. This is for the ADA base cabinet. So we need to go back to our elevation view. And you can see right here that ADA base cabinet appears to be view number 10 on page I08-10. So going back to our drawing, we're going to label this as view 10 on I think it was I08-10. Yep, I08-10. All right, so that is the first section view. We're going to use the copy command just like we did previously, and we're going to highlight not only the viewport, but the view title as well. It's really important because if you don't copy them both at the same time, then the formula for the scale will only refer to the original viewport. So you don't want to do that. You want to copy these both at the exact same time when you're trying to make a new view. So view title and viewport. We're going to unlock this, and we're going to scroll until we see the next view. So that would be your cabinet box here. All right, same deal as before. Using the move command, I'm lining it up with that corner, back left corner of my drawing, left corner of my view title. And I'm going to move this up again, making sure my ortho snap is turned on, and I'm going to move this up 1.5 inches. All right, now, there we go. All right, now we've got our second view in place. We just have to update the view number to view number 2. And we have to update the arc reference to match the correct arc reference here. So let's go back again. The drawer stack is view number 1 on the same page. So all I want to do here is actually just delete that 0, making this view 1 on that same page. Okay, moving on. Let's keep this process flowing. We're going to go to the next section view, which will be view number 3. And I think that was our section through the base cabinet with doors. Yep, it was. And I forgot I need to go back and lock this viewport too. So make sure I lock that, make sure that's locked. Yep, okay, we're good. Really, really important to make sure you're locking those as you go. That way you don't accidentally mess up any of your scaling. So again, using the move command, line that up with that corner, move it up using a second move command, 1.5 inches. Then lining up your grid, then locking down that viewport, making sure it's not going anywhere. All right, and then same deal, update your view title to be the correct view number and the correct arc reference. So back here, that was view 4 on the same page. Cool. All right, moving on, we'll do another one here. You're probably getting tired of me going over this, but that's okay. It's a very repetitive process, but the more you go over this, the more it's going to stick, the more it's going to be second nature to you, and the faster you're going to get at it too. Right now I'm kind of going a little bit slower just to make sure that like this all makes sense. But once you get that muscle memory going and you start going through these, it's going to be a lot more fluid. All right, so back to it. We're going to unlock this viewport. We're going to scroll over to the next. This is the last, actually, the last one of our base cabinets. And I'm going to move this again using the move command. And then I'm going to move it up again 1.5 inches. And then I'm going to go ahead and adjust all of my grips to match that grid. We'll lock that viewport down. And we're going to update our arc reference to be the arc reference through the trash cabinet, pending that there is one. Yep, there is. So that's view 5 on I08-10. So this will be view number 5 right here. Okay. Now, we have to include our upper cabinet sections as well. I probably should have started with those, to be quite honest with you, but that's okay. Oh, let me make sure this is locked. Okay, yeah, we're good. I probably should have started with those because, as mentioned before, when we're dealing with plotting a drawing, we want to go from left to right and top to bottom. And so I'm going to end up having to change all my view numbers, and that's okay. It's something I didn't really think about, though, until just recently here. But I want to put my upper cabinets up here for aesthetic reasons only, because it makes more sense for them to be at the top and not below the base cabinets. I mean, not that it really matters too much, but to me, it makes a difference because it's like it makes more sense visually to have these above the base cabinets, even though they're separate section views altogether. So because I'm kind of nitpicking my own work on that, I'm going to do that here. Same deal as before. You just saw me do that. I lined everything up. This will actually be view number 1. I'm going to go and update all these here in just a second, but let's make sure the arc reference is correct on this. And actually, that brings me to a good point. Well, actually, you know what? We did have one here. It's called out right there, actually. My bad. If you ever have an arc reference that's not, like, if they don't give you a section view or a elevation view or something like that, if there's ever a case where you don't have a view from the architect, what you're going to do is instead of putting a page number and a drawing number, you're going to write N/A for not available, meaning that the architect has not provided that information to us. If you do have one, of course, you do want to provide that. However, there are going to be times where they may not have that as part of their drawing set. So anyway, it looks like the upper cabinet above the refrigerator is view 7 on I08-11. So going back here, we're going to go view 7 I08-11. All right, and then copy once more. I think this is the last view we need to put. It'll be the view number 2. I can change it. There we go. And then we're going to make this, unlock it here, our taller upper cabinet. Oh. I'm clicking out of that viewport using the move command, and I'm going to line all this up just like before. Line that up to the bottom corner there of my view title, and then move it up 1.5 inches. Okay, then just carefully making sure my grid and my viewports are all lined up real nice, and locking it down. I'm still at 1.5 inches equals a foot scale, so that's exactly what I want to see. And we need to update the arc reference for the taller upper cabinet, and then we can go and update the the view numbers for the ones below. So this is view number 6 on I08-11 for the upper cabinet. Come on. There we go. All right. Now that we have all that, let's go ahead and update these. So we got 1 and 2 up here. These are going to end up being sequential, so we got to go 3. Here I'm going to double click on that, make that 4. Double click on this, make this 5. And then the last one, of course, be number 6. Okay. Come on. There we go. Sometimes it takes it a second to load. All right, so that is putting everything in your paper space. Once you have your model space all cleaned up and you've got your drawings in there, that is how you put everything in your paper space, start to finish there. In the next video segment, we're going to be going over actual dimensioning of our drawing and then putting material callouts on our drawing. And then as long as there's time, I also would like to include putting the general notes and the finishes and hardwares over on the right-hand side of the print as well. But I'm going to call this one right here just to keep things running smoothly and try to keep things evenly spaced. That way it's not too much information in each video, and it's also in nice bite-sized segments. So I'm going to pause this here. In the next video, we'll carry on with getting the rest of the views put together with dimensions, material calls, and then finishing out the drawing with our page notes and finish notes over there.